My name is Terrance Scott. The topic for this session is effective instruction. So what I'd like to do is talk about instruction foundationally. So I'm going to kind of divorce it from content. So we're not going to talk about reading instruction or math instruction or science instruction, behavior. We're going to talk about the foundations. And I'll use examples from all those things. But what does the essence of instruction need to be? So I'll tell you how I'm coming about this is I went to the University of Oregon for my doctoral program and learned from somebody named Siegfried Engelmann. And what I learned from Sig was the science of effective instruction. I am not an academic person. My area is emotional and behavior disorders. So through my career and what I do at the university is apply the tenets of effective instruction to behavior. So how do we teach kids to interact with one another and do things we want them to, et cetera, to be successful? But I'm not going to try to talk about behavior today, although my examples tend to go that direction. Again, I want it to be foundational. So to start with, I want to talk probability. And everything that I want to talk about today, I would take back to probability. And when I say probability, what I mean is there's no such thing as a sure thing. Not in education anyway. There's nothing that works for every kid. There's nothing that works every time. It doesn't exist. Instead, what we've got are things that we know have chances of working, and some of those things have better chances than others. I've become and I do research for a living, I've become very cynical about things called research-based practices and evidence-based practices. And let's just assume that they have research and evidence. Let's just assume that's true. Here's the thing that concerns me. Two things that are both research-based are not necessarily equal. And in education, we tend to say, well, it's research-based, so it's good. Let's go. I think about it like this. I want to move this bean from this table to that side of the room. I have two evidence-based strategies. One of them is to put it on the floor and push it there with my nose. I've done it. It works. Another is to take it and toss it over there. Those are two evidence-based practices, one of which seems much better than the other. So when I talk about instruction, it's easy to say, what about this evidence-based practice? There are lots of evidence-based practices. You could teach people in a number of ways. The question is, which of them gives you the best chance of working? I'm in a special ed department. I teach special ed. I was a special ed teacher when I taught. I'm concerned about kids that wouldn't normally get it. And I'm concerned about us playing those kids as if they were research subjects for us, guinea pigs. Well, let's try this and see if it works. The problem is, if we use something with a low probability and it doesn't work, it actually makes it less likely that the next thing we try works. That's a problem. We have a responsibility and an obligation to use things that give kids the best chance of success. But people will say things like this to me. I'm going to describe to you today these three tenets of effective instruction. I think people go, that doesn't work for everybody. That's why I'm doing something different. But the thing you said you're doing instead doesn't work for everybody either. What we're looking for is what's the thing that gives us the best chance. And there's no logic to saying because it doesn't work 100%, we shouldn't do it. Unless you've got something that does work 100%. I was thinking about this as if somebody said to me, I like to have my kids brush their teeth every night. And I said to them, my son brushed his teeth every night, still got cavities. Should those people go, oh, well then I'm going to stop having my kids brush their teeth? because it's not a sure thing. No, it's not a sure thing, but it's still a good idea. What does that look like when we're talking about teaching and instruction? So it's gambling is what it is. If you teach, if you work with kids, you're a gambler because there's no sure thing. And you're trying to pick the things that are going to work best. I'm not much of a gambler. I'm not like philosophically opposed to it. I just don't find it that entertaining. My wife does, and I have to follow her around the casino and pretend to be interested. The reason I think I don't like gambling is the reinforcers aren't arranged correctly. If I were to win $20, it'd be like, 20 bucks, whatever. If I lost $20, it would like ruin my day. So I'm already behind. But here's what's different about this gambling. We get to mess with it. You get to play with the odds. You don't get to do that in Las Vegas. If I go to Las Vegas and say, hey, before we play blackjack, what if I take the cards up to my room and give them my special shuffle? They will emphatically say no. Don't touch our cards. If I said, I'd like to play roulette, but before we do, can I get under the table with my pliers? They will say no. When I say, we'd like these kids to learn these skills, what's our probability? I get to get under the table with my pliers. And I get to mess with the way we do these things. But those same three things are going to be there. So what I want to talk about for the rest of my time is, what should you do with your pliers underneath that roulette table? Now, the first thing people want to talk about when I say let's change behavior, and it doesn't matter if we're talking about changing social behavior or academic behavior, is people like to talk about consequences. Oh, well, that kid's not doing well in math. We need to give them points for doing that well, and we need to find something mean and ugly to do if they don't do it right. Consequences are part of instruction. Not those ones necessarily, but consequences. But here's what's important to think about consequences. Consequences change the probability of behavior happening again. You have to have behavior before you can use consequences. Teaching changes the probability of behavior happening. So if you can use teaching to create the right behavior happening, your consequences can be positive. If we don't use effective instruction, you're going to use a lot more negative consequences. And simply using negative consequences is a really bad bet for good outcomes. So let's dig into this a little bit and talk about it. These are our three things. So I learned again from a guy named Siegfried Engelmann. These are the foundations of effective instruction. Three things have to be there if you want to maximize the probability of success. One, be explicit. What's the opposite of explicit? It's non-explicit. That doesn't help. The opposite of explicit is figure it out. Leave it open. Discovery. That's the opposite. Explicit means, let me tell you, let me show you. This is what we're doing. Here's how it connects to where we've been. Connect to prior learning. Here's where we're going with this. We can do this. You're going to be able to do this. Now, a big part of explicit instruction is me being able to give you examples and things that you find compelling. The examples in the books that we have in our curricula may or may not be compelling for our kids. I've worked with a lot of kids from backgrounds that are pretty rough. And if the examples I give them don't fit that background, they dismiss them before they've ever had a chance to think about it. So I've got to find examples that they think make sense to them. Where are your kids from? What do they like? What do their parents do? You're going to have to find examples that do that bring them in that way. That's part of being explicit. And I would add to that a whole lot of the things that I think we in the field call culturally respective or culturally responsive practices fit in number one. Am I doing things that would look like things you would understand where you come from. So I'm going to dig into a whole bunch of that. Second, but this is not a sequence, 1, 2, and 3, they're simultaneous. While I'm being explicit, you need to be engaged. Your brain needs to be thinking about the same thing I'm talking about. That's easy to say, but not everything we teach is all that interesting. Sorry, it's just not. Especially not to all the kids. And so if I don't have a good reason for you to listen, you're not gonna. And there are certain examples I always use for that, and someone today came up and told me, that's what I teach, and that made me feel bad. But Industrial Revolution. Nobody cares about the Industrial Revolution. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't teach it because it's important. What I'm saying is the kids we typically teach it to in junior high aren't going to care. The question is, what would it take to make them care? That's what we've got to think. And how can I get their brains actually thinking and doing in that area? And that's a teacher responsibility. It's easy to say, I'd like those kids to be engaged, but they don't. Then what are we going to do to engage them? So we're going to have to dig in a bit, thinking about what does it take for us to engage kids. Third, while we're being explicit and engaging the kids, they should be doing things that are specific to what we've said we want them to know. And I should be right there helping them, guiding practice, and giving them immediate feedback. So kids need lots of chances to be doing the things we're talking about, and they need to get a lot of positive feedback. What if they're not doing it right, so I don't get to give positive feedback? Then number 1 and number 2 need to be redone. We're not done until the kids can do this. If the kids can't do it, we go back and redo it. That's our responsibility. There's no fault here. It's not, that's your fault. It's simply, they don't have it, what are we going to do next? That's the responsibility. So let's start out with explicit instruction by talking about how we know those things. I ask this all the time and no one has ever said yes. Anybody in here ever heard of Project Follow-Through? I won't wait long for a response because I know the answer is always no. And I think that's a shame, although after today you will have heard of it. Project Follow-Through is the largest ever federally funded research project from the U.S. Department of Education. They spent $1 billion on this research. The question was, what's the best way for teaching kids reading if you want them to get it? What's the most effective way to teach reading? Why would it take $1 billion to answer that question? Because every university had a group of faculty that had their own idea about what the right answer to that was, and they all claimed to have research to back it up. So here's what the federal government said. Let's solve this once and for all. We've got 20,000 kids, and they got these kids from large urban areas. And so the follow-through sites were like Baltimore, Dallas, Miami, Chicago, San Diego, Seattle, etc. So now they got 20,000 kids, and they randomly assigned these kids to 9 different groups that they gave money to. And they said, here's what you're going to do. We're giving you millions of dollars. You're going to take your people and your curriculum, and you're going to go to these places. These are the kids, and you're going to teach them. You're going to make sure that everybody's using your methods. We have an independent evaluator who's going to go in, and that set of evaluators are going to assess the kids from kindergarten, when you start with them, all the way through high school. If we all do this, we're going to see if one of these methods is better than another. So as they got thinking about this, and this is the first sign to me that I was not around at that point, or was in elementary school. Something was not going right, is that some of the groups said right up front, we'll stipulate if you're going to measure reading achievement, we're not going to have as good a scores, but we don't think reading achievement is a good way to measure whether kids have been taught reading. Never completely understood that. They said what's really important, the way you measure reading is by cognitive problem solving. So the feds added problem solving cognitive ability assessments to it. Two of the groups said, we'll stipulate right up front, the kids that we're teaching over the next 12, 13 years aren't going to have high scores on either of those things, but they'll have self-esteem, and that shows the love of learning, the love of reading. I've never understood this logic. We'll teach reading for 13 years. They won't be able to read, but they're going to love reading. But that's what they said, and so the government added the self-esteem inventory. So, millions and millions of dollars, universities from around the nation, they do what they said they were going to do. The government assessed the kids every year, and they published the data, and there it is. A group calling itself direct instruction, which was led by Siegfried Engelmann, is the only group that had positive gains in all three areas: reading achievement, cognitive problem-solving ability, and self-esteem. Interestingly, the group calling itself self-esteem actually had kids with lower self-esteem compared to the mean over time. So, we spent $1 billion, we ran a controlled study, we assessed 20,000 kids, and we got an answer. And you know what happened after this was published? Nothing. Every one of those universities went back and taught the way they were teaching before. It didn't change a thing. And I think that's shameful, because what it says is we don't really care as much about whether the kids have outcomes as we do about us getting to do what we want to do. And that stuck around for a long time, and I think that has really started to turn more recently. But that's what I want to talk about. And I don't say direct instruction, I call it effective instruction, because direct instruction makes people for some reason. When I say direct instruction, I know everybody's thinking, okay, we're going to need a kidney-shaped table and we're going to have to snap our fingers a lot. So, yeah, that could be, but you don't need those things. What you need are these three things. Are we being explicit? That's my responsibility. We're going to talk about my responsibility in being explicit. Are the kids engaged? That's my responsibility. How will I take responsibility for engaging those kids? Are the kids getting it right, getting chances to practice, getting feedback? That's my responsibility. So let's start with explicit instruction. First thing I want to think about is how we organize the bazillion things that we're teaching kids. Now, I think, like reading and math, have done a really good job of this. We don't teach every word in the dictionary. We don't teach every math problem you could ever possibly come upon. We teach rules that allow you to solve. And in the parlance of pedagogy, we would call those anchors. You need an anchor. Why would you do it this way? Because of my anchor. It tells me this. Now, I like to think of it from a behavior perspective, because that's what I do. So I think of this. What do you want your kids to do when they interact with other humans? I want them to interact peacefully. I want them to... Okay, but what you're going to end up with is 117 different little rules for how to interact with people. And kids cannot remember 3 in your teaching 117. What's our trick? Let's do exactly what reading and math have done. Let's create anchors. Here's our anchor. Respect others. Okay, what's that mean? Treat others the way you want them to respect you. Okay, that's an anchor. Now, what we do is we say to the kids, if you were thinking about what others would want in the hallway, what kinds of things should you do? What should your voice level be out there if you want that? And what we know is, when you teach kids one concept with a whole bunch of these little concepts under that are examples, when you ask them about it, tell you more things, and they'll tell you what they're going to do instead of what they're not going to do. That's anchored instruction. So when you think about this, your long-term memory is where you store all that stuff. It needs to be organized. Do you have one of those closets at home that's just filled with junk, and if you open the door too fast, it'll all fall on you? That's a bad brain for memorizing things. What I want is organization. I get a flat tire. What do I know about flat tires? My working memory sends me up to the long-term memory where I find a file folder that says flat tire on it, and I open it. And inside there, I have the AAA number. Maybe I know something about jacks or tires, but that's what I know. But if I don't have a folder for that thing called respect others, it's just a thing thrown in the junk closet. Quiet voice in the hall, throw it in the junk closet. And what our science tells us is if you don't give kids a place to put it, a reason for it, when you tell them about it, it'll be gone in 30 seconds. And we all know this. How many times do I have to tell you this? A kid who is being a smartass would be right to say back to you, maybe you should teach it instead of tell it. Because teaching and telling are two very different things. If you got some drunk wino off the street to come in and say, hey, listen up, 2 + 2 is 4, we wouldn't sit around and applaud. Wow, that wino's a good teacher. Saying it's not the same as teaching it. What teachers do is we present it in ways and do things that maximize the probability that the kids get it. That's what we have to figure out. So what are you going to say? How are you going to say explicit? So when I'm thinking about teaching something new to kids, I want to think, what should I say to them? Because if I just come walking in and go, all right, Industrial Revolution, I've lost them already. What's my hook for getting them to think, I should listen to this? Now, when I was a kid, both my parents and my teachers, if I asked them why, they would say, because I said so. And I was the kind of kid that, because they said so. I don't find that kids in general accept that very well anymore, and it's not a very compelling reason. Why should we be doing this? Why should I care? One of the things people say to me is, tell them that they need to care because they won't get a good grade. If you've worked with kids at all, you know there are a lot of kids that just don't care. That's not enough. It's not compelling enough to keep going. So what am I going to say? How am I going to say it? And these last two, I want to play with a little more. It's my job to find the examples. The term directed instruction means the teacher has taken responsibility for directing what the kids hear and see in order to maximize the probability. You could just let it happen randomly. Just let them wander through the books and see what they learn. Some kids might learn, but a lot of them won't. And the probabilities were never there in the first place. So what do I have to do in order to make those examples work? First, let's focus on what we want. I found these pictures on the left and right on the internet. I don't know where they're from or why they would exist. The one on the left says no crime, for some reason only between those hours. The one on the right says no drowning. So if you came here wanting to drown, you'll turn around and leave because that's not allowed here. The one in the middle I found in a classroom. And there's a logic to it, I get it. The problem is, your kids already know this. It's like those other two signs. It's telling them something they already know. It's a reminder. Yeah, but kids are still hitting. They know it's wrong, they're still doing it. Why? Two reasons. One, hitting works. Someone's talking about your mom, you punch them right in the mouth, they'll stop. Very effective strategy. Why else do kids hit? They don't know what to do instead. We've not taught them, hey, here's the way you interact with people. Sometimes you're going to get frustrated. Here's what you should do. Every kid I've ever talked to that hit somebody, if I were to say why, here's what they would say. He started it. He said this about me. There's an example in there that we're not teaching. The example is, how are you respectful to others when they're not being respectful to you? Because that's where kids are going to make the error. What does it look like to be respectful? And then let's give them some examples. What if this happened? What if someone called you a name? What if? Because those are the real examples from the real world. And again, I think we do that fairly well when we talk about academics, but for some reason with behavior, we tend to go to the nose. So I'd like to show you a real video. We were capturing this just to show a teacher teaching, but there's something in it that I caught. The teacher here with second graders is teaching a very simple rule. It's called 6 on the floor. I'll put up here so you can see. 6 on the floor means 4 legs of my chair are on the floor and my 2 feet are on the floor. That's safe. That's what he's teaching. Now what you're going to see him do is talk about it, tell them why, talk about safety, demonstrate it, ask them a question, and then he does this. Am I 6 on the floor right now? And they say yes. And I'm kind of thinking, yeah, because you've said it 50 times, they get it. This is a really simple thing. And then he does this. Am I 6 on the floor now? And the entire class says, no. And what hits me when I see that is, sometimes because we've said it a couple times, we make this assumption that they got it. And that's not a good assumption. At every level, repetition. Repetition, repetition. And I don't mean stand there and say it 10 times in a row. I mean keep coming back to it, because it's going to be necessary. So watch how many times this teacher ends up doing it.
Go back over our triangle called So we're going to practice what's called sitting on the floor. Let me model for you what sitting on the floor looks like. So I have my chair, sit down like this. It's 6 on the floor because how many feet do I have on the floor? How many legs in the chair are there? What is 4 plus 2? So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. This is called 6 on the floor. This is how we sit down no matter where we are in the class. Okay? So let me ask you a question. Is this 6 on the floor? Okay? What about this? Is this 6 on the floor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and okay. What about this? Is this 6 on the floor? Yes. How about now? Is this 6 on the floor? No, I put 4 on the floor. Why is this not acceptable and this is acceptable? Yes.
Because there's only 4 on the floor and the front 2 of the chair are off.
Exactly. And is 4 on the floor safe? No. Is 6 on the floor safe? Yes. Is this 6 on the floor? Yes. Okay. What about this?
So I think, again, there's fairly obvious, but I just want you to think, is that level of instruction provided for most of the things we want kids to do in school? Or is it more likely we said, shut up and listen, here's the rule, and then we moved on? Even after saying it multiple times and talking about it, they still didn't really have it. Repetition. Repetition and engagement are things that have to keep happening across that. The next thing that comes up when I talk about this, and when I say comes up, if someone's going to argue with me about one of these things, the next thing that generally comes up is, well, all the examples must be real. So don't sit and tell kids about it. You can only tell them about it when it happens for real. When something really happens. Take your teachable moments. You don't create the teachable moments. The environment creates the teachable moments. In directed instruction, the teacher directs when those things will happen to make them maximize their probability of working. So let me give you a dumb example. A month ago, a flying saucer landed in my backyard. An alien jumped out and I said, "What can I do for you?" And he said, "I've been sent to your planet to learn what a dog is. My planet wants me to come back and teach them dog." So he asked me, "What's a dog?" And I said, "Well, it's an animal." And he said, "Well, how do I know if I see it?" And I said, "Well, it's got 4 legs and it's furry." Turns out that describes a lot of things. So I don't know what else to say. I said, "It barks." He said, "What's a bark?" Well, that's kind of hard to explain. Do they all bark? Well, no, not really. So this has got really, I thought, we're going to need natural examples in the real world. That's what we'll do. So here's my thought. I'm going to take that alien for a walk around this neighborhood every day for 2 weeks, and we're going to spend an hour walking and talking. I will have 2 things that I will say specifically. One is, "That's a dog." The other is, "That is not a dog." I will say one of those 2 things whenever we come upon animals. So here we go. "That's a dog." How do you know? I don't know. It just is. I really don't have a better explanation than that. Maybe if I were a geneticist, I could explain why this is a canine and not a whatever else. But all I can tell you is, no, it's a dog. All right, let's keep walking. "That's a dog." Really? It doesn't have hair like the other one. Yeah, but it's a dog. How do you know? Trust me, it's a dog. I don't know why. It just is. What about this one? No, that's not a dog. That's a squirrel. Doesn't matter, but it's not a dog. It's got 4 legs and it's got fur. Yeah, but it's not a dog. Here's another one. Okay, that's kind of like some of the others, so I get it. This is a cat. Don't confuse a cat for a dog, although they live in houses and they kind of have similar features. Don't confuse the cat and the dog. That's not a dog. That's a dog. Now that one's black. We haven't seen a black one before, but it's a dog. This is a dog. It's got really long hair. Now if you look at that dog compared to this dog, they're both dogs. Take my word. We're seeing natural, authentic dogs in a natural, authentic environment. That's a dog. This is not a dog. This is a dog. This is not a dog. And this is a dog. So we're going to walk around and see these animals in some capacity. They won't always be there. They might be in different order, but we're going to see these animals and we're going to do this repetitively. Here's how I ended this. The last 2 days, I say nothing. The alien says dog, no dog. And he gets 100%. So I say, congratulations, my friend, you know dogs. Go back to your planet and educate. So he gets in his spaceship and takes off. And then I started thinking, what do all these dogs have in common? They're big. These are big dogs. I don't know why randomly in this neighborhood they're all big dogs. It was authentic, it was natural, but they're all big. He never saw a smaller dog. And as we all know, there are some weird looking dogs out there that he hasn't seen. Now I'm concerned. If you just saw this for the first time, how would you answer this question? Is this a dog? Now all of us can look at that and go, yeah, that's a dog. How do you know? You've had enough examples. You've lived with it. But if you hadn't lived with it and somebody was trying to teach you, the set of examples you got are not good. I think if the people on this other planet show our alien this, he's going to say, I'm pretty sure that's a squirrel. Why is a Chihuahua a dog? I don't know. Seems like it wouldn't be. But we haven't shown enough examples for them to get it. And what we've said was, yeah, but they're authentic. But authentic doesn't make them good. I like authentic examples, but I'd like to see them also be logical. I want to show you what happens when they're not. You get to play the alien this time, except we're not looking at dogs. You're actually in my class and I'm teaching. And the name of this class is Colorful Geometry. It's a required class to graduate from this school that you're in. And you cannot pass my class if you don't know what OSH is. There's an example of OSH. Now, I could tell you what OSH is, but I actually had somebody tell me at a training one time. They were telling me about how we should only let kids do discovery. We shouldn't be telling them things. And they told me, it's insulting to kids for you to tell them instead of letting them get it on their own. And I said, what if they don't get it on their own? Then they're not ready. I don't buy into that. I think that's our responsibility. So I'd like to do some instruction with you that's discovery oriented. Relax. I am not going to insult anybody by telling you what we're doing. I'm just going to let it happen naturally. OSH is, I'll give you a broad definition, it's a geometric shape or set of shapes that together have color or colors in an arrangement that makes it be OSH. And here's an example. Now you're all right now thinking, OSH could be a green triangle. OSH could be a blue rectangle. OSH could be a blue rectangle, but only if it has a triangle on it. And maybe the triangle's color doesn't matter. Maybe the blue doesn't matter. And you could think a million different possibilities here. Now what I want to do is I want to make this narrow down quickly. But I don't have that power because we're doing this naturalistically. We're going to go on a field trip. We're going to get out and we're going to walk around campus. Unfortunately, all the OSH in nature around here look a lot alike. But it's natural. So we get out and we walk. Hey, look over there. It's another OSH. What'd you learn? The only thing I could think you could learn is, I don't know if triangles are important or not important. I don't know if green is important or not important. I do know that triangles don't have to be on top of something, if they're important. Keep walking. There's another OSH. What'd you learn? Nothing. Honestly. The world is filled with examples that are not effective examples. Now that could be effective if you explained it right, sequenced it right, but just where it is, it gives you no new information. Bad teaching examples, things in the real world that are random, can actually make it so that you learn misrules. You think you know something you don't. I thought it might be helpful to show you what it's not. But if you change everything about it in order to say it's not, you have no idea what was important about that in the first place. Let's do some practice. Raise your hand if you think this is a good example of OSH. Yours was the first hand I saw. What's your name? Hillary. Hillary? Yeah. Let's see if Hillary got it right. It is OSH. Nice job, Hillary. I don't think everybody in here was really getting it. Could you tell them how you knew this was OSH?
It's very similar to the second table provided, just in a different location.
But what I want you to do is tell me why it's OSH. All right. All right. Shh. Let me give her some feedback first. No. All right. I don't really know what to say about this. I mean, we did all this field trip and we showed yes and no and we walked around and then we get back in here and Hillary's kind of, here's what I'm thinking the possibilities are for Hillary. One, She wasn't paying attention during any of the field trip. Possibly ADHD, my good bet. Second possibility, Hillary has a colorful geometry learning disability. She's really slow on the uptake with colors and shapes. Third, Hillary has behavior problems. She may in fact understand this and she's just messing with me. Either way, I don't have time for it. And here's what's in common across all three of those possibilities. It's not me, it's you. If you did, it's on you. I'm making you take responsibility for the learning. Do I want kids to take responsibility in their learning? Yes. But they're not going to take the sole responsibility. If they did, then what would be my role? Teach yourself. Then why do I need to be here? I maximize the probability of this working. Now, I'm not going to ask for hands again because it doesn't work after the first time. Nobody will raise their hand again. But I could show you really obvious non-examples that you'd get right and still not really understand it. And I could keep showing you these weird things. And what I know from doing this many times is I get to this point where I could say, write down the definition of OSH. And what I've found is, on average, less than 10% of people get it right. And virtually every time somebody got it right, I asked them, how'd you know? And they said, it was a guess. That's not very effective instruction. 10% success rate and all of the ones that got it right were guessing. That's not really what we'd call effective instruction. So I want you just to remember, the real world has all the teaching examples, but the real world is random. It takes a teacher to direct those examples to maximize the probability of kid success. So let's do it again. Now, if I were really doing my best possible explicit instruction here, I would be connecting this to prior learning. I'd be talking about where we're going with this. We would have a discussion about how this was meaningful in your life and why you should care. How do your parents use this? We really dig. That's part of being explicit. What I'd like to show you, though, is the power of examples. So I'm not going to use any of the verbal stuff, although I should be. I want to just use the examples. Now, here's something I discovered. Around this part of the country, all the OSHs kind of look the same. But if you travel, you're going to see different OSHs, and you need to know. So if I just have you naturally see OSHs around here, it's not going to work. I ordered this one off the internet. And we could still do a field trip. I planted this one. What do you know now that you've never known before? Triangles are irrelevant. Blue is irrelevant. Here's another one that you wouldn't normally see, but it's a good teaching example. Now, if I were talking, I would be talking about the three things that are in common across those three examples. And I would also be pointing out the things that just don't matter. Principle 1. Show the range of real things that kids are going to run into in the real world. And you can do that when you teach math, when you teach reading, science, behavior. Show the range of possibilities. Because if you only show a stipulated set, as soon as they go out somewhere and see something that doesn't fit that, they're going to give up. Here's another possibility here. Principle number 2. After you show a range of positive, show a negative example, a non-example. When you show a non-example, change one thing. Part of the rule. Sometimes you can change it, do it twice in order to show. Red rectangle, OSH. Green rectangle, not OSH. Red, not rectangle, not OSH. Now, again, I would be talking to you about, why do you think so? What would make it OSH? How could we turn that? We could really have that discussion. I'm going sans verbals right now. Now let's practice. Raise your hand if you think this one's OSH. I'm waiting on you, Melissa. All right. Melissa says it is. Makes me a little nervous, but here we go.
Melissa.
I'm sorry, what did I,
Oh my.
your name's not Melissa. Don't tell me.
Hillary.
God, Hillary. Sorry about that. Hillary, why is that OSH?
Because it meets the requirements of
Don't give me the requirements, just tell me what OSH is. You were starting to do it, I'm sorry. I interrupted you before you finished. Go ahead.
I'm scared.
I know.
Based on the examples provided.
See, are you a lawyer of some sort?
No, I'm an ED.
What's the definition of OSH? How many sides?
4.
What color?
Red.
That's exactly the definition. Hillary, you have a skill for colorful geometry. You're not real good with personal interaction with people, but you're skillful at colorful geometry. You should be in my AP class next year. Let me talk to your mom because I want to tell her how good you are at this. Now, all of the positives, ignore the negative things I said to her before that, all of the positives came as a result of effective instruction. When you set kids up to get it right, that was all me. I gave you the right examples, I did everything, but I'm giving all the credit for my good instruction to the student. I never say, see, I'm a great teacher. I say, wow, you're really good at this, because that's what's gonna make her wanna do it again, is believing that she can. That's what I have to set up when I do this. We can go through all of this now and keep doing it, but here comes principle number 3. What would screw this up? I'm getting ready to set my kids free to go do their own thing. What would screw this up? Today, when you guys work on your project, you're going to see something that's different from than you've seen before. Take a look at this. It's got 4 sides, and those sides are red, but it's tilted. Is it still a rectangle if it's tilted like that? Now, the reason I'm showing you that one is because I'm worried. I look at our range of examples and I think, we had a good range of examples, but the one you're going to see today is weird. And principle number 3 is single out and explicitly teach weird stuff. And the way I ask myself about that is, where would the kids make an error? If you were betting on where kids would make an error, where would it be? Go back in and teach that thing individually. Does this guarantee us success? No, nothing does. But it maximizes the probability of success. That's what we wanted. So those 3 big ideas of explicit instruction. A full range of what you're going to see in the real world. You can't show every single thing, but you can show the things that, big ones, little ones, long hair, short hair. You've got to find those key features. Second, show a minimally different non-example that helps highlight discrimination. Third, what about the weird stuff? The stuff that's likely to not help. How could we teach that so that they don't get tripped up? So now let's dig into engagement. And I'm not going to go deep into engagement. My colleague Todd, who's in the next room, has been going deep in engagement today. But I'd like to talk about the concept. So here's the way I think. Kid's brain. This is, I'm representing a kid's brain by this. Here's what I want that brain to do. I want that brain to massage whatever it is I'm talking about. I want it to be thinking, boy, that's an interesting thing about the Industrial Revolution. I want it to be doing that. It's not going to, unless I make it. You know why it's not? Competition. You know what you're competing with? Movies, music, TV, sports, and here's the big one. You don't ever have anything as big as this. Boy-girl gossip. Nothing can compete with boy-girl gossip. And so I've got what I think is the most interesting lesson, and your brain is like, did they break up? I wonder if they're going to get back together, because that is what their brain wants to do. And you're going to say something like, take a minute and think to yourself what it would be like to live in the Industrial Revolution time. And all of your kids are going to go, and you know what they're doing while they're doing this? I wonder if they'll get back together. I don't know. They're not thinking about the Industrial Revolution because it's just not compelling enough. So we've got to trick them. I need to trick their brain into thinking about what I want it to think about. So remember that if I just say, Hillary, think about this, and I look at her, I don't have any way to know. Did I just call you Hillary? That is your name, not Melissa. I'm going to work with somebody else because I'm insulting you and messing with you, so I'm going to just move on. So if I'm saying, and now I'm distracted, so let me think. What was I talking about? What?
You don't know what I'm thinking about.
Hey, you guys, this is really interesting. Think about the Industrial Revolution. Neither one of you are. But how do I know if you are or not? You're just sitting there. You're thinking about whatever it is you might think about. It's possible you're thinking about the Industrial Revolution. How can I make you think about it? By making you do something. Not hard, anything. Look at this picture up here. Is that from the Industrial Revolution or after? Raise your hand if you think it's from the Industrial Revolution. Now, I can't just pretend to think because I got to do something. That forces my brain to look and think, is there industrial? What do we know about the Industrial Revolution? Yeah, I'm going to raise my... Anytime they have to act, you've created a brain that's thinking about what you want it to think about. So, how many different ways are there to ask kids to act? We could ask them to say it out loud. We could ask them to gesture it. We could ask them to write down something on a piece of paper. Write down the word you think best describes the character we just talked about. That's an OTR, an opportunity to respond. You could have them turn to your neighbor and tell them 3 reasons why you think that's right. All of these are very brief, and they're focused on the content. If I said, everybody, raise your hand if you had lunch today. If we're not talking about lunch in the lesson, that's not engagement. It's a type of engagement, but it's not academic engagement. So here's what we know. And this is something we've been studying at our center in Louisville, is how much do we need? And what we found, not just us, but others that are studying this, is that if kids are not engaged with you, if you crank up OTRs to a rate of about 3 per minute, we get a statistically significant increase in active engagement and a statistically significant decrease in disruptive behaviors. When you engage kids' brains with content and keep it engaged, misbehaviors go down because they don't have a chance to think about misbehaviors. Is it a sure thing? Will it always go away? No, that doesn't exist. Probability. 3 per minute. Now, I don't think you need 3 per minute all the time. If I'm over here talking to these kids and they're just like, oh man, I can't wait to hear more. Tell us more. I don't need OTRs, but that rarely, if ever, happens. I'm looking at kids while I teach. And when kids are like, yeah, what happened next? We just keep going. But when I see the faces kind of going, huh? Or when I see the faces kind of like falling out, or the hollow look, it says to me, they're not with me right now. I need OTR. And that's how I keep kids on task, is keep peppering the OTRs. Now, I don't do 3 per minute all the time, but there are times when I realize I need that much to keep them with me. When it's boring, when it's complicated, those kind of times, I crank those up. So when I work with teachers, I don't say put these in a lesson plan. Instead, what I do is think about, what are 5 kinds of OTRs I could use today? And I just let my kids' faces tell me when I need to use more than normal OTRs. So we've done this looked at this like 20,000 times, and we have a book on it, but I just want to show you some data. This is from several years back now. Rates that teachers give kids chances to be engaged during instruction. It's less than 1 a minute across the board, and as we get older, we do it less and less. That's problematic. Again, at 3, we get this effect, but we don't always need that effect if they're already engaged. The other thing we know is that when we do use OTRs, at every grade level, the tendency is to ask one kid a question in front of everybody and think that's engagement. And it is engaging for one kid. However, what we know is kids with disabilities and kids from disadvantaged backgrounds. And why disadvantaged backgrounds? They tend to have a lower vocabulary level and a harder time having verbal interactions with adults. Those are not engaging, they're aversive. I don't like, when I was in college and still to this day going to meetings, I don't want someone to point to me and ask me a question. That's very aversive. But that's what we do most of the time when we try to engage kids. Not very effective. So here's a study we did. In Kentucky, I looked at Title I schools, elementary schools, so poverty. My first question was, how many schools are there in the state, elementary schools in the state, that are Title I and get distinguished on the state reading assessment? And out of all the schools in the state, there were 12. 11 agreed to let us assess them. I sent my little army of observers in, and they sat in every single classroom of those 11 schools and watched teachers and coded what they were doing. So the coding is, did they give an OTR? Did they say something positive? Did they say something negative? Did they give a direction? So they're just doing this coding during instruction, only instruction. I found a match sample of demographically similar poverty schools, but with low reading scores, and we went and did the same thing, sat in every classroom, coded teacher instruction. The big analysis is called hierarchical linear modeling. Long story short, group OTR is the only significant difference between high and low performing schools at the elementary level from a background of poverty. Here's how big the difference is. The average kid in one of those distinguished schools during an average week gets more than 260 extra chances to respond during instruction. That's the difference between high and low performing elementary schools. It's a teacher behavior.
Can you say that again?
The difference between high and low performing Title I schools, according to this study, is the degree to which teachers engage kids during instruction. Engagement. We know engagement's foundational. What we find, though, is engagement happens only when teachers do something to make it happen. Because our kids aren't that interested in a lot of the things naturally until we get them interested, and there's so much competition for their brains that we have to go in and do something. Feedback, I'm just going to tack on here. So I'm a behaviorist, I am a behavior analyst, and when I say reinforcement, I think people think I'm saying we should hand something out to kids, and I'm not. In a school, we should be using verbal affirmation, which is as simple as this. Yes. Thank you. Good for you. I'm impressed. Exactly right. Wow. All of those work. Those are so important, verbal affirmation. And we've got those 3 layers that we talked about. Be explicit, be engaging, give them chances to do it, and give them positive feedback. That's the easiest of the 3 things. And we don't do it. we use very low rates of even the most basic verbal affirmations. One of the things that I had this puppy in my house for the last year, and one of the things that I thought about in training this puppy is, you know what would make this way, way easier? Is if the dog understood English. Because if I could just say, poop outside, here's why, that would be so easy. And when they did, if I said that was the right way, but they don't understand any of that. Humans do. And yet we still don't do it. The biggest advantage we've got is the language. And we aren't using it effectively. So I like to think about what that needs to be. This is what it is. The average elementary school teacher during instruction, again, when we do these observations, we only watch teaching, which usually lasts 10 to 15 minutes before they go into practice, and we're only watching the instruction. About once every 6 to 7 minutes, a teacher will say or gesture something positive to a kid. By middle school, that's once every 13 to 14 minutes, and by high school, it's about once every 22 minutes. Those are not rates of feedback that would be predictive of kids getting better at something. That's problematic. Again, if you could only do one thing to get an effect, it would be, should be, to tell kids when they're doing it right. The effect size is incredible. It's the simplest and most effective thing we could do, and we don't do it. But again, I think people think, well, we don't need to overdo it. What would that look like? We don't want to do too much of this. And I was thinking, yeah, I've never heard anybody go, yeah, our school was getting way too positive. We needed to crank that down a bit. But people will, I think, legitimately ask, well, how much is too much? And my answer is, I don't know, but we're in no jeopardy of getting there. Don't worry about being too high. That would be a good problem to have. I don't think that could ever be a problem. Because you're not saying, thanks, good for you, wow, I'm impressed, unless they do it right. We're not just wandering around saying this all day. It's contingent upon behavior. So here's a bigger study. 3 behaviors, and they're not the same as the big 3 we're talking about, because number 1's not exactly the same, but time, percent of time that the teacher is looking at and talking directly to kids. That's not really explicit, but I'm going to pretend kind of like that's explicit. The rate per minute of OTRs, that is an index of engagement. And the rate of positive feedback, and we count gestures or words. We originally, a few years ago, tried to do smiles, and we could not get reliable, people couldn't agree on what a smile was. So we only do thumbs up and words now. So what we do is we take those 3 behaviors and we create a composite score. So you get one score that represents those 3 things. Then what we do is we run something called a latent class analysis, which tells you how many unique types of teacher there are in the world. Sometimes when you look at a latent class analysis, it'll say there are 8 clusters of teacher. We get 3 here, which essentially means high, medium, and low. And now we can predict. This is my favorite part of the study. Let's go in and look at those different kinds of teachers and see what happens. Here's what we found. If I go sit in a classroom for 10 minutes and code teacher instructional behavior, if the teacher I'm coding at the end of 10 minutes has rates that are in that lowest third of all teachers, you can predict right then, if I watch the rest of this class, these 27% more likely than average kid to be off task, and 67% more likely than the average kid to be disruptive. Nothing that we know of predicts kid behavior better than adult instructional behavior? Nothing. And that doesn't mean it's 100%. Oh, if you do this, you'll never have problems and all your kids will learn. There's no such thing. Probability-wise, nothing predicts it better. The problem we still run into is people don't do these things. Probably 7, 8 years ago, I was invited to do a thing in Indiana for brand new teachers. It was in Muncie, and I probably had 400 or 500 brand new teachers in there. And they gave me an hour to talk to them, and so I said, I'm going to spend my whole hour talking about engagement. So I spent my whole hour talking about how to engage kids and OTRs, etc. And at the end of the talk, I said, how many of you had heard of OTRs and engagement before today? Not a single hand went up. That's a big part of our problem. Higher ed is not teaching these as foundational. And they are foundational. Foundational in the sense that they go across everything we teach and everything we do. We have to give kids a rationale, and we have to be clear about what it is we're doing. We have to get kids' brains with us and thinking and doing and acting with this if it's going to stick. You've got to give kids chances to get these things in the real world with us there to guide them and give them feedback. Which brings me to my final things. 1, you are so important. What you do when you're in school makes a difference. And you can choose to do one thing or another thing, but you make a giant impact on the probabilities of kids' success. 2, I would argue that everything we talk about, and tomorrow I'm going to talk about classroom management and other things, I'm still going to argue it's all instruction. Teaching kids what you want them to do and setting up an environment to make that happen. But instruction is super important. And 3rd, take your pliers and go under the roulette table. But don't just bend wires randomly. There are certain things you can bend that will make bigger differences than others. That's what we look for. How can I control the things that will make the biggest difference for the kids we're talking about? Now, I have not sent these slides to them yet because I am slow and off task, but I will. In fact, I'm going to do it this evening. If for any reason you can't find them or don't like them or want something else or have a question, I'll be here after if you have questions. But my email is there and you can feel free to contact me with any other questions. No problem. Are there any larger questions right now? Before I end, I want to say I apologize to Hillary for picking on her so much. I usually pick on somebody, but for some reason, I picked on her too much in the wrong way, so sorry about that. Anything else? All right, well, thank you for being here, and enjoy the rest of your conference. Thanks.